doctoral research through Western University. It's a long, kind of boring document with a lot of information. And this presentation today is hopefully going to summarize it pretty quickly, but also show you from a practical sense what we did to address the problem. So the first thing I want to talk about is accessibility services. Now, accessibility services, they're in every single university in Canada. They're mandated to be there. Every single university has to have some sort of office that supports accessibility. So pre-COVID, there'd be a lot of students coming into our office to do learning workshops, use our tech lab, that sort of stuff. All of our services were basically provided in person, similar to if you go to counseling services or health services. Usually you go there to see someone to access those tools and resources. And this required a lot of scheduling. And I'll get into the numbers here in a second. Now that we're living in the COVID era, there's very limited campus access. Basically, no one's going to any campuses in Ontario right now, maybe just some very specialized lab work and stuff. There's basically no in-person services either, service-wide. So you can go to the health center for emergencies and stuff, but really everything's been scaled back quite a bit in person due to COVID. So generally, everything has shifted to remote. And I'm sure a lot of us can agree that our institutions, they had to very quickly adapt and adjust to being online, whether you're talking faculty or student service-based offices. So definitely a big change since I applied to do this presentation last year. So this is accessibility services. This is where I used to work. Again, like I said, it's our centralized office that manages the academic accommodations for students with disabilities. Now, when we talk about disabilities, it can really be a very broad field of disability, I guess. So we deal with students who had permanent disabilities, temporary disabilities, episodic disabilities, suspected disabilities, and there's a whole bunch more in there that I'm sure you can all see that. And now we're starting to even address more things like mental health is falling under the accessibility services wing too. And there's also like racialized trauma, sexualized violence. Those can all result in more disabilities, more functional limitations. Students experiencing racialized trauma might not be able to write their exam that week, et cetera. So it's really broadened out in the last year for sure with what is encompassed by accessibility offices. Now, accessibility services, in order to get access to our services, you have to register with us. So you should usually have some sort of documentation, but you don't need documentation stating that you have some sort of disability or something traumatic has happened that may result in functional limitations. So we do a lot of things in our office, things like registration, reviewing medical documents. We provide academic accommodations. We help students manage their accommodations. We have our exam center. We do one-to-one consultations. We put course materials in alternate formats. We have a peer mentorship, accessible transportation, note-taking support, accessible housing, service animals, assistive technology, learning strategies, graduate and work integrated learning supports. So we support, even though we support generally a smaller population of students, we do all of the things that any other student would need. Yeah, students need housing. Well, our students might need specialized student housing. So we address all of those and a lot more. But I just wanted to give you a little snapshot of what the office does. Now, generally speaking, students would access services and tools in a static form or a dynamic form. So static being in our WCMS, our web content management system, or our university website. They can access some resources on there. They can, book appointments, et cetera. And then we have a dynamic aspect where students can come into the office. They can use our tech lab. They can meet with consultants. They can write their exams there. And this is great, but I think there's definitely some students that are probably falling through the gaps, especially now that we're in the COVID area and we've completely shut down the dynamic way we provide services and tools. And so I'm going to give you a couple quick rough statistics surrounding students' disabilities across Canada. So approximately 1 in 5 students in Canada have at least one disability, many students presenting with more than one. At the University of Waterloo, 41,000 students go there. 8,000 students have a disability, just based on percentages. and less than half of them actually register with the accessibility office. And you'll see I spell accessibility two different ways. We spell it weirdly at Waterloo, but yeah. And so it just goes to show that we do a lot of support, even with a relatively small number of students, a few thousand. We do almost 4,000 student-facing appointments. We do almost or over 14,000 unique course-based accommodation requests. We do almost 2,000 hours just working with faculty to make sure the students are getting their appropriate accommodations. So there's a lot of hours of work supporting students. I just want to put that out there. Now, the big problem that I kind of saw happening for my research was that really, and maybe my title of my paper is a little bit arrogant, but it was looking at the inaccessibility of student services. So I'm not just saying accessibility services at the University of Waterloo is inaccessible. I'm really saying all student services have some degree of inaccessibility, because most of these services, tools, and resources require you to be on campus. Whether you're going to the Writing Center or the Student Success Office, the Registrar's Office, usually you got to book an appointment and you got to show up to the university. And it's a big ordeal to even, like I said, do a Writing Center appointment. So along with that, there's a lot of accessibility legislation that has come in relatively recent years that is kind of the motivational force behind why we need to all step up our game in higher ed. We need to make sure that not only are our courses accessible with accessible syllabi and accessible course content, we need to make sure our services are accessible too. And I don't mean putting tactile things on the floor or having accessible elevators, which we do need. I'm talking about the actual service delivery. Now, it's said that by 2025, Ontario must comply with the AODA legislation, which is our provincial accessibility legislation. And with it being 2021 now, we're getting very close to that deadline where, all public institutions need to make sure that they are delivering everything that they do in an accessible format, just to oversimplify what the AODA compliance is. Now, at the University of Waterloo, 42% of students are in a co-op program. So almost half of students are in co-op, which means they're doing full year schooling. So they do 3 full semesters. They don't get the summer semester off. 1,000 students are registering for academic accommodations, and 397 students registered with our office convocated in spring 2020. So it's a little pat on the back. We're providing a great service to the students, and they are graduating at the end of the day because we are, meeting the needs of their functional limitations. Now, some big problems that come out of this, us being online and remote now, is that students aren't really registering as much because they can't get into the office, or even if we weren't online, it's a bit of a awkward thing to go into a doctor's office. It's always awkward. There's a stigma associated with it. And it can be really challenging for students to come into the office to register. Once students are registered, they'll be missing appointments. The students have other things going on too, so they can miss appointments, which causes a lot of wasted time on the staff side. I mean, if someone doesn't show up for an appointment, you're losing time. Workshops, same thing. We were running workshops throughout the day, but again, some students couldn't come because of their schedules. And so really barriers to the academic environment continue to remain for these students because they're not getting the appropriate services. And there's a lot of long processes involved. So even registering for accessibility services, you have to get medical docs from a physician, and then you have to also get the same medical docs to send off to OSAP. It's a lot of heavy lifting for these students and a lot of barriers. So I've rambled a lot about how big University of Waterloo is and all the students we do and how we support them and what the challenges are. So let's take a look at the solution that I came up with. And again, this might seem a little backwards by design because when I designed my solution, we weren't all remote. Now everyone's forced to be remote, so it might seem a little more obvious now. But like I said, all of these services that we provided, they need to be available for students remotely now. And we need to make sure that they have access to all the things they need. So the solution was really a couple things. The first thing was to look at how can we digitize the tools and services our office has. The next thing we need to look at is how and where can students access content and a quality piece. Whenever you're converting something to digital, you want to make sure that the quality remains consistent. So simply uploading all of your note-taking strategies into a PDF and putting it on your website, it's not really super high quality. I mean, students don't want to read PDFs. They don't want to, we want to make sure that we are engaging with them in a similar fashion as we would if they were meeting one-to-one with our learning strategist. So what we did was we created an accessibility services course, which might sound kind of obvious because there's a lot of courses that universities offer. As a staff member, I would do my human resources training, my AODA training. I'm sure we've all done these at our institutions, and students do a lot of their academic courses in their learning management system. So I thought, well, wouldn't it be cool if we could create our own course within our learning management system and make it open so anyone can register for it. There's no tests or quizzes, but it just has a lot of resources and it bridges that gap. It does a little bit more than what our website would do. And so as you can see here, we have a video of an office tour. We have new student information. We run a drop-in center daily. We run our workshops through it. It's become a really cool one-stop shop for students. And here's just one example of what one of our note-taking strategy modules looks like. And so everything's listed and itemized. It's created into videos, and all of our documents are accessible too. So, and our LMS is accessible too, and we regularly run tests and check the accessibility. Along with that, we created an accessibility services YouTube channel, and I'll get into the stats of that as well. But that's just where we host our videos, just because it is really still the platform of choice for students. And we also create accessible documents. So everything is run, any document we create goes through our alt format team, and appropriate alt text is put in. It's tagged appropriately, and students can read it with screen readers and stuff like that too. So it's not so much of a big PDF dump of resources. We've really put a lot of thought into how and why we're doing some of these things. Now, the reason why we went with the accessibility services course is because it goes beyond what our university website can do. So we want to leverage the learning management system that our students were using. I mean, they're already on it all day anyways, taking their courses. So now we have, basically we have their ears, because we can push out quick notifications. They get a lot of alerts. It's almost like if we were in their Facebook, to be honest. We're just kind of in their face with a lot of stuff. We provide synchronous and asynchronous content. So synchronous being our workshops and drop-in center, and asynchronous being our pre-recorded workshops and videos that we've made. We also, like I said, I've uploaded all of our resources and tools. It's very secure. It does use the single sign-on and multi-factor authentication. So students, they don't need to make a new account. They're already in Learn. They can access these courses pretty easily. And it also provides us with a ton of analytics for what students are registered with our course, who's viewing what, when they were last on, etc. And because our course is open, we do have faculty registered, we have staff registered, we have students who are registered with accessibility registered, and we have students who are not registered with accessibility services registered. And to be honest, it's worked out really well. It's a bit more of a community. Yeah, it is geared towards students with disabilities or some sort of functional limitations. But other students have said, hey, this is a really great resource. Do you mind if I use your essay writing strategies stuff? Sure, go wild. Or professors sharing it with their class. So it's worked out really well in that sense. And we have, as you can see on the right, we have a ton of modules. A lot of it's based on learning strategies and things that students with learning disabilities and that sort of stuff would benefit a lot from. And they're all created by our learning strategist. And so what we did was, when we did our digitization, our appointments and our one-to-one consultations, those basically are run through Microsoft Teams as meetings. So students can do kind of like what we're doing on Zoom now. They can meet in a secure environment where they can chat with someone about their disability, to ask them questions, have someone advocate for them, etc. Super useful. Access, so we did leverage the LMS, as I mentioned. It was kind of a no-brainer. I mean, the course cost us nothing because our university has a license to D2L, which all of our courses run through. And in order to maintain the quality, we do regular course reviews. We send out student surveys. We make sure all of our resources go through all formats, and we also make sure we consult with members of a community, so folks with disabilities, to make sure that we are meeting their needs. We've really put a lot of thought into this. We've had students with low vision test out our site with screen readers, give us feedback if they like it, because really that's one of the most important things when you're developing content for students with disabilities. And so as I mentioned, our consultations, a very unflattering picture of me, we would meet with them over Microsoft Teams. And that way it was cool because they could even invite a parent in if their parent had consent to be there, or any other, maybe a faculty member as well, to talk about some of these challenges that students are having. So it's kind of like a nice one-stop shop where everyone can meet like we normally would in our meeting rooms, but now we can do it virtually. So I'm going to get into the results now. What actually happened as we started tracking the data. So as for positive outcomes, the majority of students prefer meeting online on Microsoft Teams. Students love being able to just very quickly flip on their laptop. Sometimes I'd be meeting with a student to do a functional assessment, and they're in their pajamas because they're a student and they just woke up and it's lunchtime. And so that convenience is really good because now their missed appointments are super, super rare. In my role as the adaptive educational technologist, I would probably have at least 1 to 2 missed meetings a week, which is, it's 2-hour slots and a lot of prep with case notes and reading docs that goes into those. And now missed appointments are almost non-existent. And when I say the majority of students prefer meeting online in Microsoft Teams, that's not to say that there are some students who prefer to be on campus. Definitely some of our students with who are low vision, who use service animals, who like getting on campus and coming into our office to meet with their special or their specific accommodation consultant. Yeah, some of those students still will be glad to get back on campus once we open up, but we've provided an option that gives a little bit more accessibility to the whole process. And analytics provide a really cool insight to how students are engaging with our content. So now we can use our LMS as a form of triaging when students are coming in to use our services. So instead of a student, we'll call him Billy, coming in saying, hey, I'd like to meet with an accommodation consultant because I have a learning disability and I want to learn more about how to take good notes effectively, we can say, well, Billy, there's actually, the first thing you should do is check out the Learn course because we have a ton of resources and asynchronous videos. The second thing you should do is check out our upcoming workshops. We're actually running one for that next week. You should also pop by our drop-in center because we always have staff in there Monday to Friday. And then after you've kind of checked those boxes, if you still need that next level support, yes, let's get you set up with a one-on-one 1-hour appointment. And that has really helped too, because now when students are coming back at the professors or coming back at the office saying, you guys didn't support me, we can say, well, we can see you didn't even look at any of the resources that we shared with you. So it's a really cool way to just track everything. And we can also see from our standpoint, what resources are being the most utilized, which ones aren't. It's just a really handy tool. Anyone who's ever looked in the back end of an LMS, they have a lot of functionality. And so now with our office, we offer 70 online workshops. We have over 50,000 views on YouTube in 15 months, and we have 2,500 people registered from the community in our course. Most of them being students registered with our office, but I mean, it doesn't really matter if you're registered or not. There's a lot of useful tools in there for you either way. Now, some big drawbacks with this course. The course is not a be-all end-all or a mega problem solver. We still run an exam center. So until some of these professors and programs start, doing more of a universal design when it comes to their assessments, some students are still going to have to come into our exam center and write their exams using specialized software. We've seen a lot of professors, going a step in the right direction, removing time limits for tests and doing a lot of those practices. Functional limitation assessments can be challenging too. just for me as a technologist, meeting with students and seeing how they're using something like a Braille display with their iPad. It's hard to do that over the computer. And so there's definitely challenges with one-to-one consultation. Some students do, like I said, prefer to meet with their consultants in person. And I think the counseling offices are really seeing a big challenge there. People going for counseling support would really prefer to see someone in person. And it's not exclusive to students registered with accessibility services. So it's not necessarily a drawback, but it does change a little bit about how we've designed our course and some of the tools that are on there. Yeah, that's kind of a small problem. So moving forward, I think that student service-based departments, whether you are a writing center, accessibility services office, maybe you're a faculty of math, you should strive for more of a high flex model of service delivery. High flex is basically the wave of the future when it comes to higher ed. Students want to be able to learn kind of whenever they want, however they want, wherever they want. And I think in the next few years, you're going to see some of these leading institutions really start to realize the importance of offering high flex. I work at the University of Toronto at OISE, where we're exclusively graduate programs. And I know with the undergraduate programs at U of T, they're actually very low in the amount of online courses they offer percentage-wise compared to other universities. So it's really going to get a lot of universities, I think, to step up and look at, okay, how can we do a course that's either blended or high flex, because that's what students want these days, especially as our student population becomes more international. And now with something like the pandemic, they can actually access a course from anywhere in the world. We need to also make sure that we make continual improvements to the course, and that includes bring the relevant stakeholders in. So whether it's the students registered with disabilities or other members of the community, to just get their feedback on how the course is going, and really collect that student feedback data and the analytics and analyze it and do something good with that information as well too. And that's it for my presentation. I know I kind of rambled super fast there. I wasn't sure on time. I know I got to like 1:30. So my references, there's like 150. They can all be found in my paper. You don't need to read it. I've kind of summarized it for you. And if you have any questions about my project or my program, feel free to ask me. The one thing I would say is that since this project started, we've noticed other student service-based departments like the Writing Center, Student Success Office, counseling, a lot of them have went ahead and created their own courses too, after seeing how well the LMS can be used to engage with students. So it's pretty cool to see a bit of a ripple effect. But yeah, that is my my presentation. I feel like I talked a mile a minute.
Thank you very much, Ryan. That was fantastic. And you're perfectly on time. We do have a minute if anybody has a question to ask now, or you'd rather them send them to you through your contact information?
Sure. Yeah. You can find me on LinkedIn if you want, or you can email me from the email. But yeah, if anyone has questions, or if anybody works in a student service department and they want to figure out how they can kind of do this, I could definitely give some advice and stuff. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much, Ryan.
No problem.
Okay, so we have with us also Erica Hargreave from the University of British Columbia, who will be presenting "Are You Asking? Accessibility in Online Learning." So there are three authors on this: Erica Hargreave from UBC, Laurie Jones from the BC School District number 8, and Eva Somoji from BCIT. And I'll turn the mic over to you now, Erica. We're happy to have you. Thank you.
Thank you. So I should clarify there. I teach at BCIT, UBC. I'm a master's student, and this particular project was done as a part of my master's with Eva and Laurie Jones, and it's something that that certainly Laurie Jones and I are planning on taking further, and we're sort of at the early stages of building an initiative around. And so, if as I go through this, anybody here has any ideas, any thoughts that they think we should look at as we start delving into it, and also if anybody as we sort of start to build, or as we start, as after, hearing what we're building, is interested in building with us, there's that invitation too. So I'm just going to go to my screen share here. And as I share my screen, I'm not going to go into the full slides just because I'm going to be coming out and looking at some different things that are on my desktop. And when I go into my full slides, it just makes it more difficult, sort of coming in and out. So the project that we're building is called Are You Asking? It came out of a course that we took in ableism, equity, and I think disability, ableism, equity. I can't remember the exact title, but you get the idea. And it's all about accessibility in open educational resources and online learning. So the first little bit of this is participatory. So I'm going to ask a few different questions, and you can either jot your answers down in the chat, or if when I, in a minute or two, if I'll ask if anybody, wants to sort of, turn on their mic and add, verbally, share their responses. That's great too. So what does accessibility mean to you? So is there anybody who verbally feels like sharing what accessibility means to them? No?
Sure, Erica.
Oh,
I wrote in the chat, but I realized as soon as I pressed, like, no, I don't mean create barriers, but accessibility is about making sure barriers are as low as possible so that participation can happen for everyone in the same space. Yeah.
Okay, thanks, Felina. Now, what does accessibility mean to you in online education? Okay, Ryan.
Well, I just did a presentation. No, I think that accessibility in online education means that everyone who's in the learning environment has equitable access to the academic environment. So it just means designing your course for accessibility, making sure that the way you've structured and designed things will, at the very least, try to catch as many students as possible that may have functional limitations. And I think that's why we now see in these online courses, we no longer have music playing in the background or crazy animated GIFs. We've really tightened things up with how these courses look and even how our university websites look and feel. And some people will say, man, the new university website, it looks so boring and plain. It's very just generic. It's like, well, it's also very accessible too. So yeah, so that's what I think.
Yeah, thank you for mentioning the GIFs. I hate Slack communities because I'm dealing with a long-term concussion, with basically post-concussion syndrome, and it's amazing how GIFs will spark those symptoms. I probably also didn't, just so everybody is aware, pick the most accessible coloring on the background of my slides. I did this when I was really tired and apparently needed bright colors. So, okay, so when you answered that last question, what perspective were you coming from? Okay, I see from Helena, the facilitator. Anybody have any different perspectives? The instructional designer. Okay. Now, where does your knowledge of what makes something accessible come from? Okay, I see that Sarah started to attend accessibility webinars. How about some studies, but working with students who have diverse abilities? articles and research papers. Okay, excellent. And who decides what makes something accessible? Okay, so Sylvia says the user. Ryan says accessibility checkers and end user checkers. And Helena says the user. So are you using the right person to decide what makes something accessible? So just as you reflect on that question, to give you a bit of a background of our team, we all have some form of disability. In my case, I'm dyslexic, which while it's termed a learning disability, I also see that as one of my gifts in life, because I think it's one of the reasons why, like, my brain just works differently, and it works differently in a way that has been a huge advantage to me in sort of figuring out the digital space and looking at it in a way that not everybody sees at first. It's also, as a storyteller, I think it's been an advantage. And as somebody with dyslexia, I actually do get paid as a writer. So what was I going to say? And then I'm also dealing with some newer disabilities from some car accidents. And in entering into my master's, I was entering into my master's coming off of several years sort of working through some hospital programs, learning how to manage chronic pain and things like that. And then I got hit with a second car accident in the midst of my master's that caused this long-term concussion. And so I'll go a little bit further into my story in a bit, but first of all, I'm gonna just pull up a video where Lori shares a bit of her story and some of the notion behind where we're going with this project, which sort of speaks to both what I believe it was Sylvia and Helena suggested about it really being important to check in on with the users what actually is accessible to them. So, oh, apparently that was the big. Okay, let's see here if I can go. No, it's not going to go. Okay, we're going to have to look at Lori in smaller view here.
Hi everyone, sorry I couldn't be there with you today. Just wanted to come in and say a couple of things. So something that I noticed taking online classes as a person with disability was the importance of being able to speak about my individuality within my disability, that my needs weren't always the same as everyone else that has the same disability.
Sorry, I just realized that you must be seeing my slides as opposed. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen here for a second, and then I'm going to start sharing it again so that you see the video. Okay, we'll go back here.
Hi everyone, sorry I couldn't be there with you today. Just wanted to come in and say a couple of things. So something that I noticed taking online classes as a person with disability was the importance of being able to speak about my individuality within my disability, that my needs weren't always the same as everyone else that has the same disability as me. So being able to communicate and say, this is what I need in order to be successful, was really important. And I think if I had to go back into an online program that wasn't as receptive to hearing, this isn't going to work for me, I need whatever accommodation I need, or I need this delivered in a different way, probably would not have led to me getting my master's. I have definitely given some tips and tricks to professors to say, hey, do you realize that your online content, a screen reader can't read it? you've got it in such a way that, you know, my screen reader won't even read it. And so fortunately I have the ability to save up some energy and read through an academic article. But the reality of it is it's much easier for me if I have a screen reader do it while I read. It takes the pressure off, takes the energy down. It's not that I can't retain it. It's not that I can't read it. It's not that I don't know it. It's that in managing my disability, I have to take into consideration my energy level. And the only way to do that is to have some tools to help me out. So I highly recommend listening to your disabled folks really carefully on an individual basis, because they're probably only asking for the things that will make them successful. In terms.
Okay, so I should state here that in addition to, you know, Lori and Eva and I all being people with disabilities, we are also all people that are instructors. And in my case, and it sort of speaks to some of what Lori just shared there, I've essentially been through 8 years of programs at hospitals and pain clinics, sort of teaching me how to manage, you know, my symptoms so that I can continue pursuing my dreams and sort of be more active within my life. And one of the things I've learned through those programs was that what worked for me, what the sort of, you know, magic mix to me staying in a good, healthy, forward moving place is different from what somebody with the exact same disabilities as me might find. And so, for example, when I had my second car accident and it caused a really doozy of a concussion, I took a few months off my master's. And then when I came back in and I started to read papers online, I started to, well, I thought I was just getting a doozy of a migraine in the first place until like I started to get like shaky and, you know, tearful and everything else with it. And realized that it was the concussion symptoms coming back up. And unfortunately, that's something that I now have to live with and manage because it doesn't seem to be going away. I hope it does one day, but it hasn't yet. But there's another student in our same master's program who has similarly dealing with what's termed post-concussion syndrome. And for him, like with Lori, the screen readers have been his solution. For me, they are not. It was actually what the Accessibility Center tried to point me in the direction of when I first, you know, came to them, trying to figure out how to sort of sort that issue out. But they're too electronic and they don't speak in a natural enough voice, which causes my symptoms to spark all over again. And so for me, the solution is to get, you know, real person, real read audio recordings of my of my readings, or to have the time and the space to be able to go through things at a sort of more spread out pace. But some of what this made, you know, myself and my sort of my storytelling partner, who's a different Lori, her name's Lori Yearwood, realize is that if I was dealing with some of these problems in online education, that chances are our students were too. And there was something, and I think it was Ryan said it earlier in his, when he was, I don't know if it was in a session or when we were just chatting at the beginning of this workshop. But one of the things that Ryan noted on was, you know, when you're building some of these materials, to create them thinking things that could be helpful to all students in general. And so that's something that Lori and I started to build out in our own courses, where we've been building in active screen breaks, hopefully to help some of our students that have disabilities that maybe haven't shared them with us, but also just because they're good, healthy living things for everybody. But through this too, we've started to realize that one of the things that happens out there is often the people making decisions around what's accessible possibly haven't had to deal with some of these struggles themselves. I know myself, I looked at this in a whole new way after I started dealing with pain, but especially after I started dealing with the long-term concussion. And one of the things I realized, and luckily I'm not a young kid, so I'm not afraid to do this, but I really had to become my own advocate. And unfortunately, a lot of our students out there maybe haven't reached that point where they're not intimidated by their instructors to advocate for themselves. And I've also been fortunate that UBC is a very different place now than when I was in my undergraduate. And because I've been doing very well in the program that I'm in, I think it's meant that people have also, made sure that they're, accommodating to my needs as I kind of deal with this new sort of long-term concussion. But once again, I'm at a very different point of my learning than a lot of our students are. And so what we want to start to do is we want to start to build kind of a database of like a bunch of stories from different students that are dealing with different types of disabilities, and some the same disabilities, and kind of hearing their voices on what's worked for them as they've approached online learning. And so one of those students, well, she's not one of our students, but one of those people that I've just sort of did a little test interview with as we sort of lead up into doing this series where we hear different people with disabilities voices is this crime novelist, Jane Bernard. And she creates these great novels. But when she went on to do her master's, she had to drop out of the program because accessibility, there wasn't this recognition to make it, to listen to the student and to make it accessible for individual students. And so I'm just gonna let you hear a little bit of that interview with Jane.
I think what I would like is not necessarily a scheduled check-in every few weeks during the semester, but I would like the option, the flexibility, if I identify, and I think this would be especially true for people who are just doing it for the first time. If I identify that there's an area that is causing me problems, can I go back to the instructor and say, are there some workarounds here that you know of that other students have used that are helpful? Because we as disabled people, we don't always know what's possible. We don't know what to ask for if we're in a new academic environment. But by the same token, we could pretty much identify very quickly what's not going to work for us. Mm-hmm. So I would like to have an upfront interview without being expected to have all the answers. Yeah. And I would like the option to tweak the program as I went along, or tweak the accommodations as I went along as needed. And I think that would have given me a lot more confidence in going into learning environments, and it would have spared me a lot of the energy that got diverted from learning into managing the accommodations. We talk a lot about children don't learn when they're hungry, and so we put a lot of effort into making school nutrition programs and things. But when you have a disability, a lot of your energy has to go into managing the disability. And so your learning suffers because you're always having to manage. And I think if the education system recognizes that there is a huge energy diversion on the part of any disabled student just to manage their disability, that they might treat us with more tolerance and at least more tolerance, if not active assistance.
And so now one of the things that comes into play here, and especially you know, when I hear Jane sort of mention the word tolerance, comes around this term ableism. And so either if somebody feels like speaking up, or if they feel like writing in the chat, can somebody just describe what they believe ableism is? Realizing I can't see the chat right now, so oh no. Okay, let's see if anybody's written it down. No. Okay, so with ableism, and I'm gonna hazard a guess that we're all guilty of ableism at some stage of the game. I know I certainly am. But I'm gonna leave that to Lori to kind of go into a little bit of an explanation of. And so I'll just go back to her video. Oh, there she is. And I'll share the screen again.
Of disabilities, or in terms of ableism sometimes being not something you think of or happening by accident, it happens all the time. I'm disabled. I'm in a wheelchair, not that you can see it right now. I have multiple sclerosis. It's just something that's out there. And I wasn't aware of half the things that I need now, or that potentially my students need, or that someone else needs, until it comes up. And you have to be open to being able to say, you know what, I just didn't know. I'm very sorry. Let me, you know, move forward and fix that. The other thing is that I'm doing a whole lot more to try and educate myself about disability, because it's not the job of the person who's disabled to teach us. And so ableism might be unintentional, but it's less likely to happen if you educate yourself. So, you know, when you're looking and saying, hey, I'd like to include disabled voice, do you realize that voice is actually ableist? Not everyone can speak. And so it's more likely, you know, or more effective to say, I would like to include disabled perspective. Now, that's something I struggle with still. And I think that there is, for people who are trying and putting in the effort and trying to recognize where ableism exists in society, in infrastructure, in systematic oppression of disabled people, you're going to make mistakes, but the reality of it is you're trying. And I think that most disabled people, I'm going to speak for myself because that's the only person I can speak for, I have a whole lot more tolerance for people who are trying than people who do it continuously, even when corrected, and don't really attempt to educate themselves. So I think that's probably the best thing I could tell you about unintentional ableism.
Yeah, so ableism is basically it's when you treat somebody differently, and sometimes not in as positive a way because of because of their disabilities. I know for, like, you know, in our circumstance, like with my work, when I had my first car accident, my team and I lost an incredible amount of work because I was the face of the company. We are still very capable of doing the work. In fact, we have created some of our most award-winning projects since I've had my disabilities. But there seemed to be a perception out there. And I mean, even when you think about, like, and I mean, I know I'm guilty of this. When I think I have a, you know, you haven't, before I basically ended up with a head injury and a long-term one, I would have had a notion that people with head injuries, you know, perhaps didn't have the same cognitive abilities. And I now know that that is absolutely incorrect. So, and then we've also grown up in a society where we have all sorts of different terms that are ableist that we use all the time without even thinking about, like the blind leading the blind and things like that. When we first came up with this talk for the project that we're launching into, that was the title that we called it. Can anybody see what we put in that title that's ableist? Feel free to speak up or add it to the chat.
Yeah, the reference.
Yeah,
to
okay.
listening.
Yeah, exactly. So, so yeah, so as we build out and as we build different resources around, like where we share different people's stories and what works for them with online learning, we're also going to be building some open educational materials around things like ableism, around resources that'll help to make things more accessible, as well as you know, some resources for students to you know, to help them to learn to advocate for themselves. And the problem is when you're thinking about ableism, you know, it's, I want to say speak up, but that's probably ableist too. Anyhow, it's, you know, we, that's one of our goals too, is to create some open educational resources to help both students and instructors and instructional designers. And if there's anybody who wishes to engage and be a part of that, or to add in their ideas or their thoughts, we invite you to join us. And Lori's and my contact information is just right there. And I know I'm just about to get hooked off the stage as Catherine laughs.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much, Erica. That was great. Thank you. So thank you for participating in the session, and I encourage you to return to the schedule page of the conference platform so you can find the next session that you want to attend. Thanks again to you, Erica Hargreave, for your presentation today, and to Ryan as well.